Sarah did not pack much the night she left. One bag, a change of clothes, the small roll of money she had been saving, without knowing exactly why, tucking coins away in the lining of her winter coat, coin by coin, month by month, the way you prepare for a storm you can feel coming, but cannot name. She left a note on the table beside the window. 2 words. She did not look back. The Alpha King's palace had been many things to many people. To visiting dignitaries, it was a symbol of power. To the palace staff, it was steady employment. To Caius, who had been born inside its walls and had never once slept outside them, it was simply the air he breathed, unremarkable, constant, assumed. To Sarah, it had been a cage that did not know it was a cage. She had arrived at 17, a ward of the crown, which was the official language for something that had no cleaner name. She had been brought in after her home pack collapsed. Territorial dispute, bad politics, the kinds of disasters that grind small families into dust. And the palace had offered protection. She had accepted because there was nothing else to accept. The palace was beautiful. She noticed this the way you notice the weather, factually, without warmth. What she noticed more was the layout, which corridors led where, which doors were guarded at night and which were not, which staircase exited closest to the eastern wall. She memorized all of it. She did not know yet why she was memorizing it. She told herself it was curiosity. Later she would understand it was something older than curiosity, something in her that had always known, before her mind caught up, that she would eventually need to know the way out. Caius found her 3 months after she arrived. Not physically, she had been visible to him since the beginning, present at formal dinners, acknowledged in passing, but he found her, truly found her, on a Tuesday afternoon in the East Library when she was reading a book on territorial boundary law, annotating the margins in small, neat handwriting, arguing with the author in silence. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. "You disagree with him," he said, not a question. "He's wrong about water rights," she said. She did not close the book. He came in and sat across from her, and they argued about water rights for 2 hours, and she did not once soften her position to be polite, and by the end of it, he was looking at her differently, and she noticed, and she did not know yet whether that was good or bad. It was both. It was always both. What grew between them after that had no clean name either. He sought her out. She did not seek him out, but she also did not avoid him, which in the language of the palace was its own kind of statement. They talked about politics, about history, about the small dry humor hidden inside old legal texts. He laughed at things she said, before he understood why he was laughing. She made him think faster. He made her feel, briefly, seen. But Caius was the Alpha King. He was enormous in the way that mountains are enormous. Not threatening, exactly, simply present in a way that rearranged everything around him without asking permission. He took up space the way people take up space when they have never once had to consider that other people might need it too. He did not mean to diminish her. He just did. Small things, at first. Decisions made about her schedule without her input. Opinions offered as conclusions. Doors opened to her, certainly. Doors she had not previously been able to reach, but always with his hand on them, which meant they were still his doors, and she was still a guest. She noticed all of it. She said very little. She had always been good at reading rooms. She had not yet learned that this was not a virtue she had been given. It was a skill she had built because she had needed it to survive, which is a different thing entirely, and a sadder one. The night she decided to leave, nothing dramatic happened. There was no argument. No final terrible moment. Just a Tuesday. It was often Tuesdays, she thought later, when the important things happened, when she was sitting at the window watching the palace grounds, and she felt something inside her go very quiet and very still, and in that stillness, she understood something. If she stayed, she would keep becoming smaller, not because anyone was making her small, because the palace was built to a scale that made her small, because she had spent 2 years answering to schedules that were not hers, occupying rooms that had been given to her, belonging to a life that had been arranged around her without her being asked. She had started, without meaning to, without even noticing, to think of herself as someone who lived inside other people's decisions. That was the thing that frightened her. Not the palace, not Caius. The version of herself she could see coming if she stayed. She packed the bag that same night. She did not give herself time to reconsider. She knew herself well enough to know that she was capable of talking herself out of the right thing if she waited long enough. She wrote the note. 2 words. She left it on the table, and she walked out through the corridor that led to the staircase closest to the eastern wall, and she did not look back. Not because looking back was beneath her, but because she had already rehearsed it so many times in her mind that she had used up all her backward glances. She had nothing left to spend on the real one. She went east. She did not have a destination, she had a direction. This was enough. The borderlands were what maps printed when they had run out of interest. A stretch of rough territory between formal kingdoms, claimed technically by everyone, and managed practically by no one. It was exactly the kind of place where a person who needed to disappear could do so completely. She did not disappear. She found a settlement 3 days in, 40 or so people living in organized chaos, the kind of community that had all the ingredients for something real, and none of the structure to hold them together. Bad resource management, no clear chain of communication, everyone working hard and nothing coordinating. She looked at it the way she had looked at the East Library's boundary law book, with the calm certainty that someone was wrong and she could see exactly how. She stayed for 2 weeks to help with a supply shortage. She was still there 2 years later. She had not meant to build anything. She had meant to rest, to figure out what she was, to find the thread of herself she had almost lost. But the territory had needed organizing, and she was very good at organizing, and the people had needed someone to make decisions they could trust, and she found that she was able to do that too, not because she had learned it in the palace, but because she had always known it, and the palace had simply buried it under layers of gilded quiet. She became their alpha. She did not seek the title. The title found her the way it finds most people who actually deserve it, without ceremony, in the middle of a practical problem, when everyone in the room turned to her at the same moment, and it was simply obvious. The pack grew. The borderlands began to matter on maps that had previously ignored them. Her reputation arrived in other territories before she did, which she found both useful and faintly embarrassing. She built water rights agreements with 3 neighboring territories. She thought about Caius sometimes. The way you think about a burn, with the fingers that remember the heat, not with the hands that once reached for the fire, not with grief, with information, with the knowledge of what it had felt like to be loved, as though love and ownership were the same thing, and how important it was that she had learned the difference. He found her 7 years later. He had not been looking. Then, at some point that he did not examine too closely, he had been looking. He told himself it was political. The borderlands had become significant enough to require formal diplomatic engagement. He told himself this often enough that he almost believed it. His party arrived on a cold morning in early autumn. He had expected, in some part of his mind he had not fully inspected, to find her living quietly, carefully, surviving the way people survive when they have run from something. What he found was a functioning territory with a council chamber, a fair taxation system, 3 active trade agreements, and a woman standing in the courtyard who looked at him with the kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling, but the management of it, something much harder to acquire. She shook his hand. She did not perform welcome. She did not perform indifference. She simply greeted him the way she greeted everyone who arrived in her territory, with complex intentions, with patience, with clarity, with the quiet authority of someone who did not need the moment to go any particular way. "You look well," he said. "The territory is well," she said, which was not the same thing as what he had said, and they both knew it. Their first official meeting was about water rights. She had known it would be. She had prepared for it for 2 days. She sat across from him in the council chamber, with her notes and her advisors, and she walked him through the existing agreements with the precision of someone who had built every line of them from scratch. He watched her more than he watched the documents. He was trying to find the girl from the East Library, the one who argued with boundary law authors in the margins. She was still there. He could see her, in the sharpness of the arguments, in the dry flicker of humor when one of his advisors said something incorrect. But she was inside something larger now, something she had made herself, and he understood with a clarity that felt like cold water that he had never known the size of her. He had loved her. He believed that now. But he had loved a version of her that fit inside the palace, inside his life, inside the frame he had built around her, without asking whether she wanted to live in a frame. She had not wanted to live in a frame. He could see that now. 7 years and 200 miles and a territorial water rights negotiation later, he could finally see that. He stayed 3 days longer than necessary. His advisors noted this without commenting, which meant they were commenting in the way that advisors do, observationally, carefully, in the margins. Sarah let him stay. This was not invitation. It was not indifference either. It was something she had learned to do, in the 7 years of building, negotiating, holding people together through hard seasons. She had learned to let things be what they were, without immediately deciding what they meant. On the third evening, after the formal business was finished, they sat at a small table outside the council hall. There was a fire. There was no audience. The night was cold and clear. He tried to apologize. She could see him trying, constructing the sentence, testing its weight, setting it down and picking it up, and she let him try. "I should have," he started. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "I don't need the rest of the sentence," she said. Not unkindly. "I know what comes after it. I've finished it about 40 different ways over the years. Which version was right?" She thought about it honestly. "Most of them," she said. "In different ways. The fire was the only sound for a while." "Do you ever think about coming back?" he asked. She looked at him steadily, not with anger, not with longing, with the calm of someone who has thought about a question for years and arrived, quietly, at the other side of it. "I did come back," she said. "I'm just standing in what I built instead." He had no answer to that. She had not said it to wound him. She had said it because it was true, and because it was the truest explanation she could give him of where she had gone and what she had done there. She had returned to herself. She had simply done it somewhere else. He nodded once, slowly, like a man absorbing something he would be absorbing for a long time. She told him one thing from the 7 years. Not the hardest thing, the second hardest. About a winter 3 years in, when the pack had nearly fractured, and she had stayed up for 4 nights in a row working through a resource dispute, and on the 5th morning, when it resolved, she had sat down in the supply room alone and cried for about 10 minutes, and then stood up and gone back to work. She told him because she wanted him to understand. It had not been easy. The leaving had not led to some simple, clean version of freedom. It had been hard work. It had been a long construction project on cold ground, with no blueprint. But it had been hers. He listened without filling the silence after she finished. She noticed this. It was new, or perhaps it was something he had always had, and simply never needed before. The ability to hold a moment without reshaping it. He left the next morning before the sun was fully up. She stood at the gate and watched his party go. Not because ceremony required it. Because she chose to. Her gate. Her choice. Her cold morning, her breath visible in the autumn air, her territory stretching out in every direction around her, quiet and present, and hers. She watched until the road was empty. Then she turned around. There was a council meeting at mid-morning. A supply caravan arriving from the south at noon, a boundary review with her eastern neighbors scheduled for the end of the week. She walked back across the courtyard, unhurried, thinking about the water rights amendments they still needed to formalize. She did not know what would come next, between her and Caius. She did not know if anything would come next, or whether this had been a closing of something, rather than an opening. She held the question the way she had learned to hold most things, without forcing it to answer before it was ready. She found, in the pale morning light of a kingdom that was entirely her own, that not knowing did not frighten her. It had once. It didn't anymore. That was the whole story, really. That was the part that had taken 7 years to write.